we're getting very close to the end of the book, so we'll have to start thinking about what next. But this is The Winter War by Priscilla Shirer with Gina Detweiler, Chapter 46, Shiny Things. Dad? Levi's voice was a mixture of wonder and puzzlement. His father was lying in a coma in a hospital room on Earth. Yet here he was in the enemy fortress, standing tall before them, dressed in his full regal armor, his long, lethal sword prepared for battle. "Mr. J.R.?" Brianna gasped. Mr. J.R. lunged forward and thrust his sword into a forger's midsection. "You two okay?" he asked as he spun around to face the other forgers who was coming at him from behind. He slashed his sword in the forger's neck. The forger's head was thrown backward, nearly severed, but it soon recovered, the head fusing to the body once again. Levi shook himself from his shock as two more forgers entered from outside the doorway, rushing toward Mr. J.R. with mighty growls. Levi raced to intercept them, his blade sizzling as it sliced through a forger's red-hot core. The forger arched and stumbled sideways, but when Levi withdrew his sword, he saw the wound he had inflicted close, as if it had never been there. "Dad, how did you get here?" "No time to explain right now," said Mr. J.R. Thane was thundering down the steps, wielding his hammer. "Get the water." Mr. J.R. lashed at another forger and went to meet Thane. Two forgers came at Levi and Brianna. "They're too big," Brianna whispered. "Go low," said Levi. As the forgers closed in, both kids dropped to the floor and slid across the smooth floor between the forgers' legs. They were in a flash, slashing at the rock-hard legs with their swords. The forgers toppled over, grunting. "Get the pots," Levi shouted. "I'll handle these guys." Brianna saw Mr. J.R. and Thane fighting, though Mr. J.R. couldn't seem to get close enough to the armored leader to get a strike. But he danced and darted this way and that, keeping Thane occupied. She turned to the throne. The two birds, still on their perches, were too high for her to reach. How was she going to get those pots away from them? Another forger lunged at her. Despite their size, they were quite slow. Brianna swung her sword, hitting the monster in the leg. She ran for cover to the other side of the lava pit and searched frantically for something that might attract the birds, something shiny. She saw nothing but blackened lava rocks and broken bones. The heat and gases from the lava pit overwhelmed her. Brianna coughed and fell to her knees, her head swimming. She could barely breathe. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her seed. She saw that it was glowing in her palm, sparkling like a tiny red star. Then she had an idea. She closed her fingers over the seed and thrust her fist straight out in front of her. The network of sparkling seeds deployed over her head, giving her instant relief from the toxic fumes. She took a few deep breaths to clear her head. Then she stood up straight, hoping that the little seeds' lights would shine through the smoke. "Come on, Goonies," she called out. "Come and get it." Despite the hazy smoke and the two warriors still fighting forgers and Thane on the other side of the pit, the bone breakers holding the pots became mesmerized by the sparkling lights in the shield. They spread their wings and flapped slowly, making noises in their throats. "Come and get the shiny lights," Brianna whispered. The birds took off from their perches and glided toward her. As they flew over the top of the pit, the birds opened their beaks to snatch the sparkling lights. The pots fell into the pit. They flared and then cracked from the intense heat. The birds closed in on Brianna, but before they hit the shield, the lava pit exploded, unleashing tongues of bright blue flame that shot all the way to the top of the fortress and into the sky above. Xavier saw the explosion at the fortress as he rode Tannen through the sky. Blue lava shooting out of the pyramid, tearing the top of it apart. The percussive blast stirred up the air into turbulent waves that rocked Tannen's whole body, throwing him backward. Hang on, Xavier shouted to Evan and Manuel as Tannen struggled to recover. The warriors, following on the ground, let out gasps of fear. They too knew something had happened, but they weren't sure if it was bad or good. They did it, shouted Evan. They blew up the fortress. I hope they're okay, Manuel said in a shaking voice. I hope we're okay too. 560, 561. The Prince warriors were standing firm and singing. They had been doing this for what seemed like hours, bracing their shields against the enemy attack. The Sparks, who appeared now as the bright, shining warriors, took their place on either end of the line so the lava forgers could not break through. They were still singing, and the Prince warriors had joined the song. But they were getting tired. Ivy's arm was cramping from holding this position for so long. More and more lava forgers were piling up against their shields. The Bonebreakers hadn't relented in their attacks. In the woods behind them, the Ascalons were starting to move, breaking through the branches that stopped up their wheels. Ivy wondered how much longer they could last. Suddenly, the sound of an explosion met their ears, and the ground began to quake, knocking both armies off their feet. "What was that?" Mary cried, falling against Ivy, who fell against Finn. "The fortress," said Finn. Ivy's stomach did a flip. The fortress? She looked up to the mountain. Above the dense cloud around the summit, blue lava was shooting into the sky. "They did it," she whispered. "Levi and Brianna." The lava forgers began to act strangely, spinning around in circles and knocking into each other. The Bonebreakers flew back up toward the fortress, shrieking. The Ents seemed to turn to dust right before their eyes. Ivy knew it was time to fight. She drew her sword and raised it in the air. Finn did the same. He was tall enough that everyone could see him. "Attack! Attack!" she shouted. Finn echoed the command. The Prince warriors let out a joyful cheer and raised their swords, slashing at the confused forgers. Every stroke reduced them to ashes. All along the line, the forgers were falling. But then the growling of the Ascalons rose up from the woods. Ivy spun around to see the deadly machines once more on the move, churning out ice webs and snakes as they rumbled through the burned-out trees. "Ascalon's coming!" Mary hollered. She looked as though she might faint. Others turned in confusion, unsure what to do. The Ascalons would overrun them at any moment. "Don't run," Ivy shouted. "Stand firm." The Ascalons barreled toward them, picking up speed. Ivy's breath caught in her throat. She kept her shield raised, urging the others to do the same. It was all she could do. Then she became aware of a noise rising up from somewhere beyond the Ascalons. It sounded like a battle cry. She squinted. Sure, she was seeing things, for coming up behind the Ascalons were dozens of figures dressed in white armor with swords and voices raised.